Hi everyone, and thanks for being here. I'm Peter Wittig, Director of Customer Experience at Motive.io. We make a platform for enterprise VR training. We're based in Vancouver, Canada. This talk is based on work my company has done, conversations with many companies who have done VR pilots, and other VR training providers. Here we go. Future-proofing your VR training pilot project. Why is this an important topic? Firstly, VR is great for training. I'm not here to convince you of that. You can find lots of studies online saying this is so. There is a link to a guide on our website if you're interested to learn more about that. Despite this, most companies don't make it past their VR pilot. In this talk, I want to share some strategies for a few things: creating a successful pilot, how to prepare for pilot success, and laying the groundwork to build upon that success. This talk is applicable to a wide range of industries. There are companies in all of these industries that use VR training. These are a few examples, but there are certainly more. This talk applies to many types of training. The topics we'll cover are generally applicable over industries and training types. VR training offers a number of benefits. Studies from many reputable research institutions and case studies from some of the world's largest companies have shown this to be the case. Increased retention and engagement, increased confidence, more focused trainees, faster training times. People will be better prepared to do their jobs with less training. This means a happier, safer, more productive workforce. Everybody wants that. I want to address a couple issues I hear often. Will VR training replace all other kinds of training? No, absolutely not. Will VR eclipse some forms of training? Yes, I believe it will, but that doesn't mean other forms are going away. Much like TV is better than radio for some things, but this certainly didn't make radio go away. So depending on what you're doing and the context, one probably makes more sense than the other. VR training is an effective way to help people do their jobs better. It is a positive addition to the training space and one we should all be excited about. It is often used as part of a blended solution within an organization. Okay, here is a high-level overview of what we need to do to future-proof your VR pilot project. If your pilot gets these things right, you'll have a much greater chance of expanding your VR initiative in your organization. Let's jump in and look at each of these in detail. Showing ROI is often the most important metric for determining the success of your VR pilot. Any pilot worth investing in will track learner outcomes. Having that data will allow you to improve your VR training as you move forward. However, organizations do not often have comparable metrics for their current training process. This makes it difficult to compare the training results of the current process to those of your VR pilot. Let's help. During the pilot, we want to generate data on the current process as well as capture data from the VR pilot. This is necessary for showing ROI. How do we generate the needed data? We need to answer some questions about the current training process. Then, we will identify the potential improvement that we want to measure when using your VR pilot. Let's consider those two things as we look at areas to find a good candidate procedure within your organization. Most VR pilots focus on one specific procedure. Therefore, choosing the right one is paramount. Identify a procedure where learning outcomes will have an immediate and measurable impact. Immediacy will keep the project momentum going. Measurable helps you prove ROI. We want something that happens often. The more the procedure happens, the bigger the value. Also, people will get more used to the idea of VR training as you go. We want something that's relevant to many people. When other departments hear about or see your pilot, if it is relevant to their department as well, it will help build internal support. Safety training is a good example. Multiple steps. We want a procedure that is sufficiently complex so it can demonstrate the learning value versus the current way of training. If it's too easy, it won't be taken seriously. Here are some common indicators to help you find the right procedure within your organization. These are guidelines. There are certainly others. Let's look at each one to determine some questions for the current process and how to look for improvements in your VR pilot. Long training time. The current process sees learners needing to redo the training several times before they can perform the task. It may take learners days or weeks of training before they can consistently do their job. This might be training for a new employee. Here's a list of questions to ask about the current process. VR training should help you realize faster training times, less or no repeat training sessions, and a reduction or elimination of the need for external resources. Also, you can't damage a product during training because they're all virtual. If this type of training happens often and there is a desire for a faster process, then this is a good candidate for your VR pilot. Training lag. There is a lag between when training happens and when employees perform the task for which they have been trained. This can happen when instructors are needed for live training and are only available at certain times. This often means employees need to be retrained and instructors need to be available again for that to happen. This is costly and causes a delay between when the job needs to get done and when it actually does. If your VR pilot can allow trainees to get the training they need on demand, then this is a good choice. Requests for help training. New employees often ask more experienced employees for help performing a task which is new to them. Every time this happens, this means two employees aren't as productive as they could be. Taking a skilled employee away from their work reduces productivity overall. The less a new employee needs to do this, the more productivity will increase. You can quantify the impact of this by looking at the number of times this happens and the amount of time it takes on a per procedure basis. The more common and high impact the procedure, the better for your candidate. So, if your VR pilot can help new employees get the skills they need without interrupting more experienced employees, this should be an option. Travel for training. People are being flown somewhere for training. This can happen when a facility has been built for certain types of training, for a training conference, or if a trainer needs to go from location to location to do their job. All are expensive. The many costs of flights, hotels, food, cars, instructors, and facilities can quickly add up. If your VR pilot can remove the need for travel, consider choosing this procedure. Given the current climate, it should be easy to compare travel costs before the pandemic and costs during the pandemic. If training outcomes improve with new technologies and you don't need to travel, this is a massive cost savings. The old way no longer works. This one is a bit different. I see this happening more and more. You have a process that cannot work any longer, but you still need to train people. That's not optional. There are two choices: retreat or move forward. Thankfully, a lot of companies are choosing to move forward. Let's look at some examples. Travel for training, which we saw a moment ago. During the pandemic, companies are investing in VR in lieu of traveling for training. For those going down this path, it will be interesting to see how many return to it as things go back to normal. My guess is a few will, but most will not due to reduced costs and improved training results. Another example, some procedures depend on new workers shadowing more experienced workers. Experienced workers are retiring. There will soon not be enough experienced workers for new people to shadow. Or when training depends on prototypes built by a design team. If the design team moves to digital prototypes, there will no longer be physical prototypes on which to train people. In this case, the ROI proposition is different than the others. This can make it easier to introduce a new way of training as you don't need to compete with the current process. The old process is either gone or soon will be gone, and it must be replaced. Once we have a candidate procedure in mind, let's think about what we need to know for the VR pilot. The scene in which the procedure takes place needs to be recreated as a 3D environment. You might hire a VR provider for this, or you may have people internally who will build that for you. Make note of the following. This will help you get your scene built more quickly. Where does it take place? A warehouse, a factory, a hospital, an office, a construction site? What objects do I need to perform the procedure? Tools, equipment, monitors, another person, control boards, a vehicle? How will a trainee interact with those objects to perform the procedure? Will they pick things up, pull levers, push buttons, move from one place to another, talk to someone, operate machinery, etc.? One final item on this. Make note of any other procedures that will happen in the same scene. The scene can be reused and help you deliver quickly on your next project after the pilot. One of these other procedures will be your next success after the pilot. At this point, we should have a decent idea of what we need for a VR pilot project. We want to identify a candidate procedure. We want to have a plan to measure outcomes. We want a way to show ROI. Now we need a plan to build it. We want to build with a plan to scale from the start. That's the best way to do it. The ability to scale primarily depends on three things. People. We'll need people with certain skills. Most likely, your company will have some of them, but not all. Knowing who you have and what they can do will help you define what tools you need. Tools. Your people need tools they can use. It sounds simplistic, but it's true. Without that, scaling VR or anything is very challenging. Make sure the tools you use match the skill set of your people. Process. Understand the process for creating, updating, and distributing VR training content. People and the tools they use will have a big impact on the content processes. Getting this right is critical. Spend some time up front to understand the processes you will use and why. Let's look at how these relate in more detail. We'll begin with something familiar. We can use this as a baseline to then talk about VR. L&D professionals have a lot of tools today. A few are listed here. Captivate, Storyline, PowerPoint. There are many. They have the skill sets to use these tools. That gives them a way to get content to trainees. This is very important. Let's examine that process. This is how training content gets produced, more or less, in many organizations today. An L&D professional creates content using a tool. They iterate on it until they are happy with it. When they're ready, they present it in a classroom, make it available via an LMS or some other company system. The L&D professional has direct control over the creation, updating, and distribution of content. Why? Because they can use the tools. Let's keep that in mind. Earlier, we noticed that L&D professionals have direct control over the creation, updating, and distribution of non-VR training content. This is what we saw a moment ago. With VR, direct control often shifts to software developers. Developers, in this case, are people who can write code and also use tools like Unity and Unreal. When that shift happens, L&D professionals still have all the knowledge of what the training should be. Now, they need to first convey that to the developers and then verify their work. Let's look at a common process for creating and updating VR training content. VR content creation with no tools for L&D. Here's how it works. You create a series of documents, spreadsheets, videos, emails, meeting notes, etc. to document the training procedure or any updates to the procedure. Then give that to the developers. The developers code and create that content in Unity or Unreal. While that's happening, the L&D people wait. The developers create a version of the VR app and deploy that on VR headsets. L&D run through the procedures in VR and make note of any changes or updates that are necessary. While they're doing that, the developers wait. If no changes are required, you're done. If changes are needed, go through another cycle. Each cycle takes approximately a few weeks. That time will get shorter as you go through more cycles. This process requires several cycles before resulting in your VR app. There's a lot of issues. More people are involved than necessary. Half your team is waiting on the other half. Knowledge transfer can be error-prone. L&D is on the outside of this process. They do not have direct control over the content. To be clear, you can definitely make quality content this way. However, the process makes scaling much more difficult. This is slow and expensive. Most companies will balk at the price of scaling with this process even if the pilot is a success. Believe it or not, this process is currently the most popular one for making VR content. Luckily, it's not the only way. You may ask, why is this process used? This is a good process when there are no tools available for L&D professionals. Maybe there weren't any tools when you started. Perhaps you didn't know there were tools available. This can certainly happen when a technology is new. Maybe the tools didn't match your needs or the skill set of your team. There are several options for tools on the market today. Let's look at them. No tools. We've talked about this a lot. Slow, expensive, and currently the most popular choice. L&D professionals do not have direct control over the creation, updating, or distribution of VR training content. That makes it hard to scale. Coming soon. Some VR companies that use the no tools approach are now building tools. This is good. It indicates that tools are the direction we're all heading. As the name implies, these tools are not currently available. When the betas or first versions arrive, my guess is they will fall into one of the next few categories, as opposed to being something fundamentally new. With these, provided they can do what you need once they arrive, you'll need to wait to scale. One size fits all. These solutions provide tools that can be easy to use. However, their ease of use can limit their configurability. From what I've seen, they are more similar to a 3D classroom than a replication of the real work environment in which a trainee virtually performs that task for which they need to be trained. If you don't need custom interactions or a custom scene that matches your work environment, this could be an option for you. In-editor tools. These are plugins, UIs, and other features that have been added inside Unity or Unreal. Their aim is to make developer tools more accessible to L&D professionals. Your L&D team will need Unity or Unreal skills and developer support to get the most out of these tools. Web authoring plus a custom scene. This gives L&D professionals a web-based drag-and-drop authoring tool to create, update, and distribute training modules that happen in a custom VR scene. A developer is needed to build the scene, but from that point, the L&D professional can create as many scenarios using it as they like. I'm going to focus on this option. There are 3 reasons I will focus on web authoring. It provides a way for L&D professionals to have direct control over their content. They don't need Unity or Unreal skills to do that. It works with a custom, interactive VR scene, which matches their real-world work environment. So with web authoring, this is the creation process. This process provides a tool for each job role. This lets both L&D professionals and developers work in parallel. This is far more efficient than half your team waiting on the other half, as described in the no tools approach earlier. Developers can create and update the VR training app in Unity and deploy it to VR headsets. L&D can use a drag-and-drop web editor to create and update training procedures. At any point, either group can put on a VR headset to try the latest version of the VR training app. The VR training app knows how to automatically download and make available any procedures made in the web authoring tool. This means content changes can be done by L&D teams. This gives them direct control of the content. I'm going to talk about updates and distribution in a second. First, an analogy. Think of a theater where a play would be put on. There is a stage, lights, sounds, props, and one or more actors. The play has a script. It says when the lights and sounds are used, where the props are, and when and how the actor uses the props. Now imagine all those props are bolted to the stage. The lights are on a complicated timer. The sound comes from a pre-built music box. Then a script update comes through. You need to call in the construction crew to unbolt and rebolt the props, reprogram the light timers, and rebuild the music box. That sounds slow, expensive, and cumbersome, right? That's a no-tools approach to theater. The same is true in VR. Now think about how a theater should work. Script updates come through. Actors may give feedback, which the writer can incorporate into the script. Light and sound can be easily changed. This is a tools approach. The actors are the trainees. The L&D professional is the writer-director. The developers are the construction crews. Keeping this analogy in mind, let's look at the update and distribution process for no tools versus tools. At this point, you're using a no tools process and your VR app has been deployed to headsets in the field. An update needs to go out. Here's how it's done. L&D requests a change. The developer creates the build and deploys it to a test headset. This process gets repeated until the build has been approved. It is uploaded to an MDM solution and distributed to headsets in the field. A developer is required for each and every change you want to deploy. I know of an instance where this approach is used. Updates to content are done twice a year. Imagine if trainees could get those changes later that week or later that day. How much revenue is lost due to months of waiting for improved training content? You don't have to do it that way. The key here is the need for a new build. If you can remove the need for a new build, you no longer need a developer for every change. If you're using no tools, or your editor is inside of Unity or Unreal, this is the process that is required. Web authoring removes that need. Again, the situation is your VR app has been deployed to headsets in the field. An update needs to go out. Here's how it's done with web authoring. Let's look at this process. The L&D professional decides to make a change. Doesn't request a change, decides to make a change. They use the web authoring tool to make the change and any adjustments. They distribute the change via the authoring tool. No developer required. The updating and distribution is directly controlled by the L&D professional. If you'll remember, this diagram looks a lot like the first diagram of the non-VR content model. This scales. Many ask, do I ever need to create a new build? Yes, sometimes. Sometimes is the key. Often you don't. The choice becomes, do I want to create a new build some of the time, or 100% of the time, as you would with any other process that uses a custom VR scene? This is a huge time and cost saver. With these processes in mind, let's think of a training example. Let's say soft skills. Imagine a VR scene in an office with a desk, a chair, and a few options for avatars. An avatar can recognize the voice of a user using speech recognition. How many different branching conversations could you author? Employee onboarding, de-escalation scenarios, sales training, difficult conversations, customer interactions. How many variations on each of those types of training could you produce? Now imagine needing a developer for not only each new type of training, but for every single change in a given type of training. It doesn't have to be done that way. Once you have the scene, you can do it yourself with the right tools. The same is true of any type of training, job skills, procedural, etc. On an earlier slide, I listed actionable data as a benefit of VR training. In this case, I mean an L&D professional can act on it. This should look familiar. Training content can also be uploaded to an LMS. Again, L&D still controls the distribution here. No new build. The headsets send data back to the LRS. This allows for continuous improvement on the training. This is a big deal. Continuous improvement. L&D authors content and distributes it. Trainees go through the content. Data about the training sessions is available via the LRS. L&D reviews the data and identifies areas of improvement. Using the data, you can know what training needs to be improved. For example, you might see that most trainees are getting stuck on step 7 of a 10-step process. Using web authoring, they can add step 7.5 and watch to see if this improves the learning outcomes. This can be done generally or on a per-user basis. It is also possible to author a focus training on a particular step, a detailed breakdown of exactly what needs to happen, and let the user start at that point. This lets them get the retraining they need without going through the whole process. No software developer required. Costs are kept down, content is produced faster, and training improves. This is only possible with VR training when L&D has direct control of the content. People with the right tools, using the right process, will go a long way to helping you scale your VR program in your organization. Be deliberate in your choice of process and your choice of tools. Know why you are making those choices. I want to emphasize this point. Planning to scale is vital. Without a plan to scale, your pilot may succeed, but it will most likely be a one and done. Costs become prohibitive without a plan to scale. Here's a quick summary of why a plan to scale is so important. Scaling VR training means a better trained, more efficient, and safer workforce. Everybody wants that. Producing VR training can be slow and expensive depending on the processes being used. Process improvements in the creation, updating, and distribution of VR content will reduce their time and costs. Achieve these improvements by giving L&D direct control of the VR content wherever possible. Control of the VR content depends on L&D professionals having tools that they can use. The right tools will fit their skill sets and can be learned quickly. When L&D professionals have tools they can use, developers are involved less often. Less developer involvement reduces the time and costs of producing VR training. Once L&D has a VR environment, the right tools let them create VR training scenarios without developers. Lower costs and faster in-house content creation will allow you to produce more VR training. This means more of your employees can benefit from it. Study after study shows VR training will reduce training time and yield better results. Knowledge retention improves, accidents happen less, and employees are better prepared to do their jobs. As more employees use VR training, more of these impacts will be realized. The impacts of improved training will result in an increase in savings overall. This makes scaling VR training possible. Okay, we made it. To recap, choosing the right procedure for your pilot, one that will have an immediate and measurable impact, will help your pilot succeed and demonstrate ROI. Have a plan to scale from the start. Find VR content tools that match the skill set of your team. This will help you establish a process that you can use for years to come. Capture trainee data and feed that into your learning systems. You will be able to see how to improve the training and have the tools to do it. That's how you future-proof your VR training pilot project. Thank you for attending my talk. My contact info is listed here. Please reach out with any questions. Have a look at our website for more information on web authoring for VR training. Thanks again.